everyone. Here's a quick video about learning objectives 7 and 8 from chapter 5. And then I have created an short in-class assignment to kind of reinforce these couple concepts. And then for Monday, you guys should also complete the homework assignment. I believe it's 5.2 homework assignment for Monday night. So the two things due Monday would be 5.2 and the in-class assignment for Monday, October 7th. I'm just double checking that's correct. Yes, 5.2 and the in-class assignment. And then for Wednesday, October 9th, the only thing that's due on October 9th is the Smart Book Chapter 5 assignment. And I'll put all this in writing. And then on Wednesday, you should be working on your project. The project is due Friday. So the project is actually due Friday the 11th. The project will be in Connect. The in-class exercise for Monday is in Connect, and then obviously your homework's in Connect. So spend some time in Connect and working on those things. So we're going to talk about notes receivable and interest revenue. So we've talked a little bit about notes payable and interest payable if you're the borrower. So we've spent some time on that. This is now looking at the flip side. This is looking at who is the person that's issuing the note receivable, the person that's going to get paid back, essentially, and what kind of interest revenue might they earn. So just a quick illustration of what a note looks like. So a note receivable is an asset. It's a current asset if it matures or is due in less than 1 year. And it's considered a long-term asset if the maturity date is longer than 1 year. So this note from Justin, between Justin and Kimsey Medical Clinic, has a face value of $10,000. So that's how much he owes them. And most likely this note came about because Justin, had these medical expenses and he couldn't pay them within 30 days. So what he did is he, reached out to the medical clinic and said, would you be interested in or willing to issue a note receivable? Over the next 6 months, I'm going to work on trying to collect this money so that in 6 months, I can pay you the full $10,000. And the medical clinic is essentially saying, yes, that's fine, but we're going to charge you interest. And they should, right? So if you're extending somebody extra time to pay, you should charge them interest. Often the interest rate is higher for things like this. So this note has a $10,000 face value. It's being issued on February 1 and it's due 6 months after February 1. There's a promise here to pay. It says who is being paid, the payee, how much, the $10,000, at an interest rate of 12%, and that would be an annual interest rate. Justin is considered the maker of the note or the payer. So sometimes we use maker, payer, where the medical clinic is the payee. So how would the company, the medical clinic, record the note? So Kimsey provided $10,000 of services to Justin, who's not able to pay immediately. He signs a promissory note offering to pay $10,000 plus 12% interest in 6 months. The note was issued on February 1, so 6 months later would be August 1. Kimsey, the medical clinic, would record a $10,000 debit to notes receivable and a $10,000 credit to service revenue. Okay? Sometimes we actually convert accounts receivable to notes receivable. In this case, this looks more like some kind of arrangement that he made up front to say, I need to have this medical procedure done. I can't pay you right away. Can we set this up as a note receivable? No interest is recorded on February 1 because no interest has been earned yet. The very first day that you make someone a loan, they don't already owe you interest. Okay, this example is talking about if Justin initially had an account receivable and wanted to convert it to a note receivable. So this kind of says, over time, it became apparent that Justin would not be able to pay quickly. We might have even seen his name on that aging schedule. So the company reached out and asked him or required him to sign a 6-month note with a 12% interest rate. He signed the note, and the company needs to reclassify the existing account receivable as a note receivable. So when that happens, you debit notes receivable, credit accounts receivable. That means there would no longer be an account receivable with Justin's name attached, but there is a note receivable with Justin's name attached. This transaction does not change the balance of your assets because you're just kind of swapping one asset for another. Notes receivable are similar to accounts receivable, except it is a formal credit arrangement. Okay, the person actually has to sign a promissory note, and they typically can be a longer time. So a normal account receivable would be due in 30 days, 30 to 60 days. A note is going to be something that we extend for a longer time, like a year or 6 months or 2 years or 5 years, right? So you have to think through the terms of that, what the note is going to look like. So Kimsey accepted the 6-month 12% note. The terms of the note mean that Kimsey will charge Justin half a year of interest. 12% for the whole year would be 6% for half of the year. Okay, or you could calculate the monthly rate and multiply that by 6. He is going to pay them $600 in interest. So we calculate interest at the face value by multiplying the interest rate by the face value of the note. After 6 months, Kimsey collects the full amount owed by Justin, including interest, and this is what they would record. A debit to cash of $10,600, a credit to notes receivable for $10,000, and a $600 credit to interest revenue because they are earning interest. It's a source of revenue from issuing the note. If you look at the calculation of the interest over time, if you took 12% of $10,000, that would be $1,200 per year. $1,200 divided by 12 is $100 per month. So they would have earned 1 month of interest at the end of February, at the end of March, at the end of April, right? So at the end of each month. This is saying, what if they issued the note in November instead of February? And the reason they're showing you this is because if you issue a note in 1 year and you're not collecting it until the next year, you need to make an adjusting entry at the end of the year. So this company has 2 months of interest revenue at the end of 2024. The other 4 months of interest is going to come in 2025. So what they will do is record an adjusting entry to an account called interest receivable, debit interest receivable, and credit interest revenue for $200. And that's at December 31, 2024. That's if the note was issued on November 1. And then when Justin pays on May 1 at the maturity date, it would be that $10,600 debit to cash, the $10,000 credit to notes receivable, a $200 credit to interest receivable, which we just recorded in the previous journal entry, and then $400 to interest revenue. So they're still getting $600 in interest revenue, but $200 was in 2024 and $400 is in 2025. So you also have to watch for dates of when the notes are made. And if they extend over 2 calendar years or 2 fiscal years for a company, you would have to adjust for the interest receivable. Learning Objective 8 is about calculating key ratios that investors use to monitor a company's effectiveness in managing receivables. So there are a couple of ratios that we're going to use. One of them is the receivable turnover ratio. This tells us the number of times during the year that the average accounts receivable balance is collected. So essentially what we're looking at is, if you can imagine a company on January 1, they work during the month of January, they provide services, they sell products. At the end of January, they send invoices out for payment, and they ask for payment within 30 days. So the invoices that go out on January 31st or February 1st, those are due at the end of February. How many people pay within the 30 days? Okay, and then the same thing happens again. We send invoices at the end of February. Those are due at the end of March. How many people pay in the end within the 30 days? And what we're looking at is what is our average accounts receivable? Okay, and how often does it turn over? So are we collecting our average balance 12 times a year, essentially once a month? Are we collecting the balance only 10 times a year, which means people are taking longer than 30 days to pay? Are we collecting it 24 times a year, so people are taking about 15 days to pay? And the receivable turnover ratio is net credit sales divided by average accounts receivable. The way you calculate average accounts receivable is to take the beginning of the year balance plus the end of year balance and divide it by 2. We also can look at the average collection period. So that one is looking at how many times does the receivables turn over. The average collection period is looking at the number of days it takes for people to pay their outstanding balances. So we have to calculate the receivable turnover ratio first. And you'll get a number like 12, 10, 6.5, 14, whatever the number is that you get when you calculate that. And then you find the average collection period by taking 365 divided by the number that you get in your receivable turnover ratio. Okay, so these two healthcare companies, Tenet Healthcare and CVS, Tenet Health, receivable turnover ratio, 18,479. That is their net credit sales divided by their average accounts receivable of 2,669. They have a receivable turnover ratio of 6.9. So their receivables turn over 6.9 times every year. To find their average collection period, we take 365 divided by 6.9, and it gives us 52.9. So it takes their customers an average of 53 days, essentially, to pay their bills. So they're not collecting cash very quickly. That's a long time. CVS, on the other hand, we have their credit sales, their average accounts receivable. Their receivables turn over 13.8 times a year. So we should also anticipate an average collection period of less than 30, because 30, if their receivable turnover is right around 12, the average collection period would be right around 30, because that would be once a month. With a receivable turnover of 13.8, we take that and divide it into 365, we get an average collection period of 26.4. The thing about financial ratios, and we're going to get into more of this as we keep going, this is just one example. Tenet Health, from what I can tell, I don't know a lot about this company, looks like it's a much smaller company than CVS. So if we only looked at their financial statements, we can only make certain like have certain takeaways from looking at their financial statements. When we start to compare two companies, if we're looking at dollar amounts, we're going to make some pretty interesting comparisons. Like CVS has 256,000 in sales versus 18,000 in credit sales. Like that's a huge difference. But when we look at turnover ratios or average collection periods, it just gives us it's a little bit more like comparing apples to apples because we have now ratios to compare. Tenant has a higher receivable turnover, a shorter collection period. It says that they more efficiently collect cash from patients. I think that is not correct. CVS does a better job of collecting cash from patients because it's coming in more frequently. So that point is not correct in the slides. I'll need to reach out to the publisher. The receivable turnover ratio and average collection period can provide an indication of management's ability to collect cash in a timely manner. So which of the following would be true for a company that has an accounts receivable turnover of 10? The company turns over their accounts receivable more than once a month. The company would have an average collection period of 36.5 days. The company would be considered as doing an efficient job of collecting receivables if the terms were net 30. The company would have an average collection period of 20 days. They would have an average collection period of 36.5 days, 365 divided by 10. So that's for sure true.